Welcome to the Wanderers History Podcast, and I'm glad to be making an announcement today. It's a project that I had in mind since the early beginnings of the podcast, back to the Venice series, the first 4 or 5 episodes, but because of circumstances and the way things have gone in the last 18 months with everything, I finally managed to pull together just a few resources and a few plans that I would like to make a series of interviews with history folks, historians, academics, initially from my neck of the woods, parts of Scotland, but also I would like to expand that to Europe, to the US, Canada, baby steps. I'd like to start that way. And part of the interview, I always enjoyed the concept of Proust's Questionnaire. Now that one, it had many versions, and you could see the evolution of oneself if you asked the questionnaire at one point, and then after 10 years to see if things have changed, ways of thinking, patterns, ideas, that sort of thing. So it's a technique used by a lot of modern interviewers, and there are quite a few very popular ones. James Lipton used it in the inside the Actors Studio. I always thought that was that was the favorite part of the interview. For me, because it revealed quite a lot, and it's a very nice. His version was a very nice mix of questions. So I've got around 12 questions. Could be plus minus one or two. So this is basically the initial draft I've got for them. I've got in mind the first few guests. Hopefully I'll be able to have rented a proper small studio, but with restrictions and all of that, I think in the early stages it could just be Zoom, FaceTime interviews, stuff like that, which of course makes it a bit more impersonal, but given the circumstances, we'll see how that goes. This will run in parallel with all the other series, the rulers and monarchs of the 16th century Mediterranean, the episode about Charles V, the final one, his abdication, remaining years, and death and legacy. That will still go on. Philip II will follow, and a few others with that. The other, like, more episodic clips, for example, ranking sieges or battles of the Mediterranean in the 16th century, that sort of thing, those will go on, and this will be its own separate thing. So I would like to think of this as an introduction, and for myself to answer these questions, and yeah, if I would like for people watching or listening, if there is a comment section, because this will be on YouTube, Spotify, Anchor. If you've got a comment section, or you can hit me on Twitter as well, and let me know what your answers are for these questions. I would be very, very interested about that. So if we can begin just now. I know some people have said that I'm a bit obsessed with the maps of Piri Reis, and this is one of Europe by him, early 16th century Europe. But it's a lovely map. I always really enjoyed his style. So yeah, let's move on to the first question. Your favorite part or aspect of teaching and researching history, bearing in mind that this will aim initially at a lot of academics and independent researchers, and teaching I haven't done that much, apart from a few presentations, but that doesn't count. Presenting my research at a few events way back. But I can definitely say that my favorite part of researching history is finding some amazing primary sources, preferably in an archive, in the location and the history of that location that you're looking into. So for me, it's something incredible to be able to go to Rome or to Venice or even to London and find a magnificent primary source that is of great help and reveals quite a lot. So that's getting in touch with the written material of the time. I think that's one of my favorite parts for sure. Next question. Your favorite qualities in a historian. For me, as I think this could be about journalists and like journalists with integrity and dedicated to the craft and the job. I would say that being principled is an important quality. Trying to be as objective as possible and to reflect the truth, and that can be something incredibly difficult because someone in 2021 trying to look into something that happened in 1500 or 1600 without being there, and there's so many, you've only got like at best in some cases half a dozen, handful of sources. So trying to portray what you think happened, not what you wanted to happen, because there are cases and instances in which certain aspects of history are romanticized, or even worse, that they're used to justify political actions nowadays. And the examples there are so numerous that I'm not going to go into that. So yeah, being truthful, being principled, and trying to reach to a much broader audience, not just for the reviewers and the academics and the editors, that sort of, no, you want to help with your research if it's possible. If you're researching the history of your local community, to help that community by unearthing parts and aspects of its history. It may sound like elementary things, but those would be my favorite qualities in a historian and a journalist, for that matter, as well, because journalists kind of relay and tell stories of modern times, but also like things that happened in the past, and there are overlapping sections between the journalistic profession and historian's profession as well. Moving along to the next question, I think it's the third question. Your main fault. So the question would actually be, what would be your main fault as a historian or historical researcher? And for myself, I think it would be at times I tend to be a bit to meander and not be as concise as I would like to be. I remember there's a funny incident in which it was a second year course at the university, and my tutor said that the essay was really good, but I tended with my arguments to, I think he said, meander like the Danube, and I thought that was a very funny quote, because that was the case. I mean, it's very important to be to have loads of arguments to support your theory or idea, but it's also very important to be concise when needed. Okay, so the next question would be your idea of what is your idea of happiness as a historical researcher? Geez, that's I think it would be to. You can never say that you've done everything you wanted to do as a researcher. You would have to live like 1,000 years, and even in that case. But I think knowing that one's research has helped the community, has allowed for healthy debate to be made around the subject, for the subject to thrive, um, and for your contribution and your name to be inscribed for the rest of time. I think that's a pretty good way to define happiness, I guess, as a historical researcher. Your biggest fear as a historical researcher um, could be depends also on the subject one would research, because this question could have whole load of implication if they would be researching the history of the First or Second World Wars, and it's a bit different when someone else does something a bit more uh, way back in time, like the Children's Crusade or the Crusaders' sacking of Constantinople. Um, I think the biggest fear would be for maybe the research to be forgotten, or for for it to be used as messaging for nefarious purposes, if that makes sense. This, of course, I've said it before, it depends on what the research of uh, each person I would interview would be. Um, for me, with history of the 16th century Mediterranean and basically the decline of the Venetian Republic, um, I guess that anyone's fear is for um, their idea, their arguments, their theories to be portrayed in an unjust way, I guess. So it's a very complicated question, that one, and it's got a lot of many implications. So I'll be very interested to see what other people um, say about that. Next up, where would you like to live and pursue your research? I think for me, it would have to be in the Mediterranean. So instantly I'm thinking um, Venice, Padova, um, the Veneto region. Also, I'm thinking Malta, maybe Cyprus. I've always thought that a good way to balance things would be to have basically two homes, one in Scotland to be here during the summer, because summers can be actually very nice, and when it gets colder, to relocate in somewhere like Malta. That would be a very pleasant balance, I would think. A more practical response to this, I think Padova would be, and a realistic one, because prices in Venice and just the problem with the sheer amount of tourism that is, an excessive tourism, I would say. Padova puts you at a bit of a distance, but not too far from Venice, and it's a lot more affordable, and it's a lovely place. I've been a few times. It's quite lovely. So that would be the practical um, and realistic response, and the more idealistic one would be to be in Scotland in the summer, and for like the rest of the year to be somewhere nice in the Mediterranean, like Malta. So we'll see what happens. If I was able to go back in time for a day when and where would I go? Um, this is I think it's a great question, just because of the sheer number of choices that one could have. For my period in history that um, I've been focusing for a while, I would think just the one day, it would be the day of the processions of the coronation at Bologna. So Charles V, Clement VII, the last imperial coronation of an emperor in Italy, I think. So that would be just from the records and what they show, and there are quite a few paintings as well with that. The implications, I think that would be the one day that I would like to go, or maybe in a ship that would kind of oversee from a distance to see how the Battle of Lepanto went in 1571. That would be quite interesting. It would be very dangerous, unless I was like on Gian Andrea Doria's ship. So that would be. But I think 1530 coronation of Bologna. That would be it, or maybe 1519. That would be the election of Charles V as emperor. But yeah, that would be so many picks for this question. Obviously, one could go with more recent times, assassination of Franz Ferdinand. What was it? Sarajevo. Yeah, no, it's a great question, and I could have literally hundreds of answers for it. So, moving along, if you were able to have a 1 hour conversation with any historical figure, who would it be? And well, 1 hour, I think that can barely cover 2 or 3 questions. It would be Philip II or Charles V. Then again, I would love to be able to talk with some of the reformers, the Protestant reformers of the 16th century. So to be able to talk to Luther, to Jean Calvin, that would be quite interesting as well. Desiderius Erasmus, more like to talk as a thinker. I've always thought being able to talk to Copernicus, that would be another. But I think I would speak. I would love to be able to speak to Charles V right after his abdication and ask him how he thought things would evolve throughout the centuries, if he would ever conceive of a notion of a 30 years war in the next century, and how the situation of the 80 years war would develop as well. So I think it would just be not an interrogation, but I would ask him, like, how did you think that this situation would pan out, both with Spain and the dominions in the New World, and leaving things to Ferdinand in the Holy Roman Empire. So I think that would be the conversation. Most likely would be at Eusted, the monastery, with him. So I think that would be, if I were to choose just from one scenario, that would be it. Your favorite female historical character figure. That there's a lot to have in consideration here. Would I go for people from women in arts history, queens? I think, just to split this question into two, I think for female artists, I would love to be able to speak to the Caccini sisters, Settimia Caccini especially, as well. For female rulers or women with significant political power, Catherine de' Medici, I think, just how things evolve in France in the 16th century, French wars of religion, that sort of thing with the regency and whatnot. So I think that would be so the Caccini sister or Artemisia Gentileschi. That's another incredible historical figure right there. So I think that could be either Artemisia Gentileschi, I've changed my mind, or and Catherine de' Medici. Your favorite male historical figure? Again, there's so many of them to choose from so many, from arts, humanities. Then you have religious figures like popes, bishops, clerics, military figures. I would have to go here. Even it would be easier if you could at least have like per century. So just because of the impact, and I think he is a bit of a underrated with a military commander with such a tremendous potential, very interesting background, the relations with the Spanish Habsburgs. I would go with Don Juan of Austria. His role at Lepanto, what he was able to do beforehand with the Morisco rebellion, I think he would be up there. And to make it not so obvious to choose like actual monarchs and people like that, Don Juan or Don John of Austria, I would say, fascinating figure with substantial impact in the second half of the 16th century, and who died quite young as well. So who knows how he could have influenced the 80 Years' War had he lived longer, a decade or even two. So I would just put it at that for now. But again, if I were to ask myself these exact same questions in 2 or 3 years' time, I think that my ideas would change, and I think that is ultimately a good thing, because if you have the same ideas for decades, and they're not subject to change and to evolution, then that's not really a good thing. So I would like to do this even like next year or in 2 years and see what comes out of it. And a question about the top 3 historians who have influenced me the most. This would be basically, without counting personal experiences, because there have been so many at the University of Aberdeen who have had such a positive impact but who didn't necessarily do the were not on the subject that I ended up steering towards. So, a top three of historians whose written work have influenced me the most, I would say Geoffrey Parker, definitely. His work on Philip II of Spain, his work on the military revolution, him talking about even like climate change back in the 16th and 17th centuries and how that kind of had an impact on warfare in Europe. He also had a very recent book on Charles V as well, so I would definitely consider Geoffrey Parker one of them. Then it would be most likely Fernand Braudel, because his work in 2 volumes, the Mediterranean, during the reign of Philip II, so volume 1 and 2, is just such an extraordinary bit of written history, with the bibliography, the sources list is quite there's quite an incredible variety there. So everything mashed up together, from the Ottomans, the Balkans, what was happening in the Italian peninsula, Spain, Portugal, social, economic history. I think it's one of my my most important book in my mind. And another historian, I would think, Kenneth Seton and his Papacy and the Levant was a significant influence because of Cyprus and what it represented for the papacy, kind of like a bastion of Catholicism and Latinity and close to the Holy Lands and to the Levant. So that would be a historian who has influenced me, I would say. Also, a shout out to Aurel Dece, Romanian historian and Orientalist. His history of the Ottoman Empire is really, really good work, and I think he was one of the top scholars in the first half of the 20th century. I think he was banished by the communist regime in Romania after the 1950s. I think he resided in Ankara or Istanbul. Very, very good work and sources from Aurel Dece. So I would put him up there as well. So technically it's a top 4, but people can put a top 5 or a top 10. There's so many academic scholars, independent researchers. There's so many influences that one can have. So it's a really good question, that. And on a deserted island, you can only take 3 history books. Which ones do you choose? I think that this ties in nicely with the previous question. I've mentioned before Braudel's book, so I've actually got it right next to me. So it would be the Mediterranean and the Mediterranean World in the Age of Philip II. I've got the 2nd volume right here, but you would want to have the first one as well. It's that's the way it would be. Then another history book, I think it would be Geoffrey Parker's History of Philip II. The full title for that would be Imprudent King, A New Life of Philip II. However, there's another book that has been that I've always enjoyed, and there are revised editions coming out. Um, Again from Geoffrey Parker, Global Crisis, War, Climate Change, and Catastrophe in the 17th Century. And this would be the revised edition that I've got in my hand from 2017. So I actually think I would pick the latter. I know I'm taking a bit of um, liberty with the number of books, so I've got a choice of two books for my second pick. Um, and then I think for the third book that I would be able to take with me on this imaginary deserted island, I think it would be The Growth and Decay of the Ottoman Empire. I'm thinking here about the work of Demetrius or Dimitri Cantemir, who also wrote a lot about musical theory yeah, Cantemir's history of the Ottoman Empire up until the very late 17th century. It's a very interesting source that I think I would take. It's very beautifully written as well. So I think that would be the third book that I would take with me. A shout out would be Papacy and the Levant. I've mentioned it before in this segment. Kenneth Seton, and I think the whole, there are 4 volumes as far as I can remember, and it's 1204 1571. Could be a bit mistaken, but I think I would go with the 4th volume that looks at the events in the Mediterranean up until and including the Ottoman conquest of Cyprus. So I think that would be it. So those would be the initial 12 questions. Of course, they would be subject to minor changes. There was another question in there. If you had the opportunity to ask God or any sort of, divine, omnipresent being and omnipotent and all of that, to change one historical event throughout history, what would it be? But that question, just, you can write dozens of essays on it, and of course it would have like implications. Are you thinking from a humanitarian angle? So do you want to prevent a war, and which war would it be? Would you like to prevent any other conflicts? I think it's a good question, but there could be basically a whole segment just on that. So think of an event, think of the period, think of the circumstances, and ask, why would you like to change this, and what would the end game and the end goals of you changing that event be? Most of them, I would imagine, would relate to saving lives and earnings and properties of just regular people, to avoid, of course, displacement. That there's so much that you can, of course, if anyone could prevent the displacement of Africans and their enslavement in what would become the United States of America, I think that's. But then again, you would think about the atrocities in the First and Second World Wars, and the wars before that in the 19th century with the Napoleonic Wars, the period. But all of history is riddled with that. So I think that might be a question that I would like to add, but I need to think of a way um, to make so that that question doesn't overshadow all the previous ones. So that could be like um, the expansion or the add-on to the questionnaire itself, and it would just be one question like this, and see what people um, would like to answer. And of course, again, if a lot of these people will want to answer questions related to their field of studies, and if that could be correlated with personal or family experiences or family history, that is the very interesting part of doing interviews with people and getting to know not just their work, but also their personal history, their family history, and stuff like that. So I'm hoping that this can be a very informative, fun, revealing, more relaxed, casual segment in the future conversations that I will want to have with um, so many people, um, and we just need to find the time for the circumstances to allow all of this to be done safely in person, if it can be done in person this year, and to hope for the best. Basically, thank you for listening to this um, um, episode, to this segment of me talking about my personal preferences and how I would answer the historian's Proust questionnaire. I'm very interested to find out all of your opinions and answers, so you can post them in the comment section below, or I think I could make like a thread on Twitter for that. In the meantime, I hope everyone is okay. Hope everyone stays safe. Please subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. Hit that notification bell. It helps the channel a lot. And until the next time, all the best.